The wind carried the sharp scent of pine and dust through the narrow canyon as she rode slowly, her worn blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her horse, exhausted from the long ride, stumbled over a loose rock, and she instinctively steadied it, whispering softly in Apache to calm its nerves. The sun had already dipped low behind the jagged cliffs, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, and the chill of evening crept into her bones. She had no destination, only the desperate hope of finding shelter before the night froze her entirely. The small town nestled at the canyon's edge seemed deserted, save for the flickering light of a single lantern swaying gently in front of a weathered cabin. She dismounted slowly, her boots crunching against the dry gravel, and approached cautiously, unsure if the solitary building would offer safety or suspicion. She knocked lightly on the door, her hands trembling, and when it creaked open, a man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, with lines etched into his face from years of sun and wind. His eyes softened when they met hers, though there was caution, a quiet questioning in the depth of his gaze. I just need a place to stay for one night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nowhere else to go." The man studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside without a word, gesturing her in. The warmth of the cabin hit her like a wave, the scent of burning wood and the faint tang of leather soothing her frayed nerves. She removed her blanket and hung it over a chair, noticing the simplicity of the interior rough wooden beams, a small hearth, a few chairs, and a table cluttered with tools and supplies. "Sit," he said finally, his voice low and steady, and she obeyed, careful not to breathe too heavily as if the sound of her desperation would betray her. He moved to the hearth and stirred the fire, and she felt a fragile sense of relief wash over her. "What's your name?" he asked after a pause, his eyes lingering on hers in a way that felt strangely comforting. "Aylin," she answered. "And yours?" "Jonas," he said. Silence fell between them, not awkward but filled with the weight of unsaid questions. She was unused to trust, to strangers offering kindness without demand, and her instincts told her to leave, to vanish into the shadows of the canyon, but her body ached for rest. And her soul ached for understanding. Jonas seemed to sense this and finally spoke again. "You don't have to leave tomorrow if you don't want to." She blinked at him, surprised. I shouldn't." "You shouldn't?" he echoed gently. "Not if you need somewhere safe. This is a place to rest, Aylin, that's all." Relief softened her shoulders, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to exhale fully. She slept that night on a simple cot near the hearth, the warmth seeping into her frozen bones. Jonas kept the fire going, and though she woke to see him sitting in the shadows, watching the flames dance, there was no threat in his posture, only quiet vigilance. In the morning, sunlight spilled through the small window, and she hesitated, unsure if she should leave, ashamed of having stayed so long. But Jonas merely handed her a bowl of hot soup and said, "Stay as long as you need. One night turns into another easily, doesn't it?" His words struck something inside her, a feeling she had buried deep, a longing for stability, for a life that wasn't hunted by fear. She nodded, quietly, knowing her answer without saying it, and that day they worked side by side around the cabin. She helped gather wood and tend to the small garden outside, while he fixed the broken fence and repaired the roof where the winter winds had torn at it. Conversation was minimal, but the silence between them was easy, a shared understanding that didn't need explanation. And yet, beneath it all, she felt an unfamiliar warmth, a pull toward someone who had offered safety without condition. Days passed, then weeks. Aylin found herself lingering in the cabin long after she had initially intended to leave. She discovered the way Jonas' hands moved when he repaired something delicate, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, and the way he would disappear into the woods for hours, returning with small gifts, a bundle of herbs, a carved wooden bird, a collection of smooth stones from the riverbed. She realized that what had begun as a night's refuge had grown into a home, a place she never thought she could find again. And Jonas, who had at first seemed a man of solitude, began to open up in ways that startled her. He spoke of his past, of loss and hardship, of a family long gone and a life shaped by survival. She listened, sharing her own stories in fragments, never revealing the full weight of her struggles, yet finding comfort in the simple act of being heard. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned to deep purple, Jonas approached her quietly while she tended the fire. "Aylin," he said, his tone hesitant, "I don't want you to leave." "Not ever." She looked up, startled, the warmth of the flames reflecting in her eyes. I didn't plan to stay," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I never expected, neither did I," he interrupted softly, taking her hand in his. "But sometimes life doesn't follow the plans we make. Sometimes it gives us something better." The sincerity in his gaze was undeniable, the vulnerability a mirror to her own. She felt her chest tighten, a mixture of fear and longing. She began, but words failed her. Jonas pulled her into a gentle embrace, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel safe without conditions, without the need to flee. That night, they sat together by the fire, talking until the embers glowed faintly, and Aylin realized that home was not a place, but a person willing to stand beside her. Weeks turned into months. The cabin that had offered a single night's shelter became a shared sanctuary. She discovered the rhythms of life with Jonas, the way they worked together in the fields, shared meals, and repaired the world around them one small task at a time. Each day, the bond between them deepened, and she understood that her heart had quietly shifted from a state of caution to one of belonging. Jonas never forced her, never demanded, and yet the unspoken trust between them grew into something neither had anticipated. One evening, as they watched the sun sink into the horizon, Jonas took her hand and led her to the small porch. "Aylin," he said, his voice steady but tender, "I know you never came here planning to stay, but I want you to be mine. Not out of obligation, but because I cannot imagine a life without you." Tears pricked her eyes, and she squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by the sincerity and depth of his words. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll stay," he replied softly, "and let this be our beginning." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, she didn't see a stranger or a stranger's kindness. She saw a partner, a protector, a companion who had offered her not just shelter but love and respect. And in that moment, she understood that her journey had led her to a place she never expected to be. Not just a cabin in the canyon, but a life with Jonas. As his wife, not by necessity but by choice, by the quiet unfolding of trust and affection. The days that followed were filled with laughter and work, with the simplicity of shared life. Aylin found herself weaving her past into the present, teaching Jonas the songs of her people, and learning his ways in turn. They built not only a home but a life, one crafted from understanding, patience, and the rare kind of love that grows quietly but steadily like the river carving the canyon. And though she had arrived expecting only a night's refuge, she had discovered a lifetime of belonging in the arms of the man who had opened his door and never let her go.